Welcome back, everybody.
Yes, welcome back.
We're diving into a concept
Okay.
that I think is going to resonate with anybody who follows geopolitics.
Absolutely.
We're talking about Sir-Halford-Mackinder's heartland theory.
Yes.
And to really get into the nitty-gritty of this,
Okay.
we've got a fantastic paper here
All right.
by Costa Athanasiou.
Yeah.
And it is titled Mackinder's Heartland Theory, a Geopolitical Lens on Historical and Contemporary Conflicts.
Fantastic title.
It was published pretty recently.
Okay.
Just this December 14th, 2024.
Very, very recent.
And I think you're going to find, as I did,
All right.
that Athanasiou just offers some incredible interpretations of Mackinder's work.
Yeah, I agree.
And he really brings it into the modern day
Yeah.
with applications to contemporary conflicts.
Yeah. I think one of the things that struck me reading Athanasiou was just how he really highlights the relevance of geography, even today, in shaping global power dynamics.
Absolutely.
You know, even in our age of instant communication and the ability to, hop on a plane and travel across the world, the control of physical space, specifically, this idea of the Eurasian heartland, it remains a focal point of geopolitical strategy.
And he does a great job of really kind of setting the stage and taking us all the way back to 1904 when Mackinder first presented this, groundbreaking idea about this geographical pivot of history. So let's break that down a little bit.
Okay.
What exactly is this heartland?
All right.
And why was Mackinder so convinced that it held the key to world domination?
World domination.
Yeah.
Well, so the heartland encompasses a vast swath of Eurasia, stretching from Eastern Europe across Russia and deep into Siberia.
Got it.
So we're talking about a massive, landmass here. And Mackinder argued that whoever controlled this pivotal landmass could control what he called the world island.
The world island.
Which is essentially the interconnected landmasses of Europe, Asia, and Africa. So he was really saying control of the heartland equates to control of the world.
So it sounds kind of simplistic on its face, but when you start to get into the factors that he was outlining, it really starts to make sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And in fact, Mackinder actually identified 3 primary reasons why the heartland holds such strategic significance. And those were its geographic centrality, its abundance of natural resources, and its inherent defensive advantages.
All right, so let's break those down one by one.
Okay, so starting with geography, the heartland sits at the crossroads of continents. So what this means is it facilitates trade and the projection of power across multiple regions.
It's almost like this ultimate geopolitical crossroads.
Yes.
This central hub from which
it's like influence can radiate outward.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of resources.
Yeah.
The heartland is incredibly resource rich. We're talking vast reserves of oil, natural gas, minerals, and of course, fertile land. So controlling these resources would give any power a significant economic and strategic advantage.
It's this tempting prize for any nation seeking global dominance.
Global hegemony, exactly.
And finally, the defensive advantages. So you were saying that Mackinder argued that the heartland was, encircled by mountains, deserts, and the Arctic Ocean.
Yes, it was naturally fortified.
Naturally fortified, making it incredibly difficult to conquer.
Incredibly difficult. And this is a point that Athanasiou picks up on. He argues that this defensive advantage might have been more significant in Mackinder's time before the advent of, long-range bombers.
And intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Right.
However, even in a modern warfare context, the heartland's sheer size and challenging terrain pose logistical nightmares for any would-be invader.
It's a massive landmass.
Yes.
Difficult to conquer and even harder to hold. So with all of that established, let's move into the 20th century and examine how this theory played out in the real world, starting with World War I. Germany's ambitions in Eastern Europe, as Athanasiou points out, can really be interpreted through a heartland lens.
Yes. Germany's push eastward, their desire to control the resource-rich lands of Eastern Europe, particularly Ukraine, really aligns with Mackinder's assertion that controlling this bridge land, as he called it, is essential for any power seeking to dominate the heartland.
And the Allied response, the creation of new nation states in Eastern Europe following World War I, almost seems like a direct attempt to prevent any single power from consolidating control over this region.
That's a fantastic point. That's a key insight that Athanasiou brings to light. He argues that the Treaty of Versailles, while ostensibly focused on punishing Germany, also reflected a deep understanding of the strategic importance of the heartland. They were looking at the long game. By fragmenting Eastern Europe into these smaller states, the Allies hoped to prevent the emergence of a new continental hegemon that would be capable of challenging their dominance.
So Mackinder's ideas, even though they weren't explicitly mentioned in the treaty itself, were clearly influencing things at the highest levels.
Absolutely. And this becomes even more evident when we move on to World War II and examine Hitler's expansionist ambitions, his Lebensraum policy. This quest for living space in the East has some striking similarities to Mackinder's vision of this heartland-based empire.
But Athanasiou actually makes a really interesting distinction here. He points out that while Hitler definitely drew inspiration from Mackinder, his motivations were quite a bit different.
Yeah, they differed significantly. Mackinder was concerned with geopolitical strategy, whereas Hitler was driven by racial ideology and a desire for, German dominance.
Right. It was this kind of warped ideology that led him to interpret and apply Mackinder's theories in a very specific way that ultimately, proved disastrous for Germany and for the world.
Yeah, and that's a crucial point to emphasize here. While the heartland theory can provide, valuable insights into understanding geopolitical dynamics, it's not deterministic. It's not a model that explains all historical events. There's a lot of other factors that come into play, like ideology, economics, and, individual personalities.
These things all have to be taken into account.
They all play a significant role.
In Hitler's case, that warped ideology led him down a path that ultimately was, very destructive.
And a perfect example of this is his invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa. On the surface, it aligns with the heartland theory. This focus on controlling the Eurasian landmass. But ultimately, it was doomed by logistical challenges, the fierce resistance of the Soviet people, and of course, his own strategic blunders.
It seems that misinterpreting or misapplying this theory can be just as dangerous as ignoring it altogether.
Absolutely.
So both world wars in different ways really highlight the relevance of this theory while also demonstrating the complexities of applying it to real-world events.
And as we move into the post-World War II era and the emergence of the Cold War, the heartland theory, again, provides a really valuable framework for understanding the geopolitical maneuvering of the superpowers.
And that's exactly what we're going to get into in part 2 of this deep dive.
Looking forward to it.
So until then, I think you'll agree that this first exploration has already yielded some fascinating insights.
Absolutely.
Into how geography and power have intertwined throughout history, and it's all thanks to Mackinder's prescient observations.
It's amazing how relevant this theory is, even today.
Yeah, it really is.
All right, so as we shift our focus to the Cold War, I think you'll find that the heartland theory, again, offers a really compelling lens through which to view the strategic calculations and the power dynamics of this era.
The Cold War, at its core, was this struggle for global dominance between two superpowers with radically different ideologies. So how did the heartland factor into this?
Well, Mackinder, writing back in the early 20th century, he couldn't have foreseen the rise of nuclear weapons or even, the intricacies of this ideological conflict that was unfolding. However, this emphasis that he placed on controlling the Eurasian landmass, it proved remarkably relevant during the Cold War. The Soviet Union, occupying the heart of the heartland, emerged as this formidable challenger to American power.
And Athanasiou argues that the very formation of NATO, the Western military alliance, was a direct response to the perceived threat of Soviet expansion.
Yeah.
From the heartland, it was this strategic effort to contain Soviet influence.
To contain it, to prevent them from leveraging the heartland's resources and geographic advantages to dominate Eurasia.
And then, of course, the Soviet Union counters with the Warsaw Pact.
Yes. Solidifying its control over Eastern Europe, creating a buffer zone against potential Western encroachment.
The Cold War really becomes this geopolitical chess match.
A chess match with the heartland as the central board.
And events like the Berlin crisis, where the Soviet Union attempts to cut off West Berlin from the West.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. These can all be interpreted as moves and countermoves.
Exactly, in this heartland-centric struggle for dominance.
So both superpowers recognize the strategic significance of the heartland, even if they don't explicitly frame their actions. In terms of, Mackinder's theory, the Cold War is, in many ways, a testament to the enduring relevance of geography in shaping global power dynamics.
And yet, as the Cold War ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union, many people were declaring that geography was no longer destiny.
Right, this idea that the world was flattening.
The world is flat. That physical location just mattered less in this increasingly digital and interconnected world.
With globalization, with the, interconnectedness of economies.
Yeah, the speed of information flow. It really seemed to suggest that, geography was becoming less important.
So is that a valid argument?
It's a common refrain, and it's certainly true that the world has changed dramatically since Mackinder's time. But I think Athanasiou makes a really compelling case that you can't dismiss the heartland theory entirely. So while technology and globalization have undoubtedly altered the geopolitical landscape, this control of physical space, access to resources, and the ability to project power across regions, these remain vital elements of national security and global influence.
He's arguing that we need to adapt and refine the theory.
You need to update it.
For the 21st century to take into account these new factors without discarding this fundamental insight that geography still matters.
It still matters. So let's dive into some of the criticisms and challenges to the heartland theory and how we might kind of update it to reflect these contemporary geopolitical realities.
So one of the most common criticisms is that Mackinder couldn't have anticipated the impact of air power.
Air power, right? The ability to project military force across vast distances via airstrikes. It seemingly diminishes the defensive advantages of the heartland. This idea that it's this landlocked fortress. Well, it's no longer as secure when you can be bombarded from above.
What about cyber warfare?
Cyber warfare, that's another big one, right? The ability to disrupt critical infrastructure, manipulate information, conduct espionage through cyberspace. This transcends physical boundaries. So controlling territory matters less when you can infiltrate and disrupt from afar. So are those valid points?
I think they are.
Yeah. And they highlight the need to expand our understanding of control. In the 21st century, control is not solely about physical occupation. It also encompasses control of information, control of financial networks, and control of the narrative.
It's
multifaceted. Multifaceted form of control, one that leverages technology and interconnectedness to exert influence without necessarily needing boots on the ground, right?
And this brings us to another criticism of the heartland theory. This focus on land-based power. Critics argue that in an era of global trade, interconnected economies, and, naval dominance, the coastal regions, the so-called rimland, are just as important, if not more so, than this landlocked heartland. So how do we reconcile those two ideas?
Does Athanasiou dismiss the Rimland theory entirely?
He doesn't dismiss it entirely.
Okay.
He acknowledges the importance of sea power and the control of these strategic choke points, like the Strait of Malacca or the Suez Canal. But he argues that the heartland retains its strategic significance even in this maritime context. He points out that control of the heartland gives a power land-based access to multiple coastlines, effectively projecting influence outward from the center to the periphery, and of course the heartland's vast resources, including energy and minerals. These are essential for fueling modern economies, both landlocked and maritime.
So it's not this either.
It's not heartland versus rimland.
Yeah. It's more about understanding how these two concepts interact.
Yeah, how they work together, how land-based power and sea power are intertwined in the 21st century. And this brings us to another important consideration.
Okay.
Globalization and economic interdependence. Critics will argue that in a world where economies are so intertwined, where supply chains span continents, and where financial markets operate across borders, this traditional emphasis on controlling territory is less relevant.
Okay.
Sanctions, tariffs.
Manipulation of currency. These can be just as effective tools of power as military force.
So how does that factor in?
Well, Athanasiou acknowledges the transformative impact of globalization, but he argues that it doesn't necessarily invalidate the heartland theory. He points out that even in this globalized world, access to resources, particularly energy resources, remains a crucial determinant of economic and military power. And the heartland, as we've discussed, is incredibly resource-rich. So he suggests that we need to think about control in a more nuanced way, recognizing that economic leverage and the ability to disrupt supply chains can be just as potent as military occupation.
So we're dealing with a much more complex and interconnected world.
Yeah, absolutely.
But these fundamental principles of geography and power, as outlined by Mackinder, still hold true.
They do, albeit in a modified form.
And that brings us to the modern era, where we can see this theory playing out in real time, particularly in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to dive into in part 3.
All right. So until then, I think you'll agree that even with all the technological advancements and geopolitical shifts of the past century, the heartland remains a focal point of global strategy and a key to understanding the dynamics of power in the 21st century.
Absolutely.
All right. So as we turn our attention to the contemporary geopolitical landscape, I think you'll find that the conflict in Ukraine serves as a very stark illustration of the heartland theory's enduring relevance.
It really does.
So let's start with Ukraine itself.
Okay.
Ukraine's geographic position, as we've discussed, makes it this pivotal player in the heartland dynamic.
It's this bridge between Russia and Europe, both geographically and culturally.
And this makes it incredibly strategically important for both sides.
For Russia and for the West.
So from Russia's perspective, how do they view Ukraine?
They view it as a crucial buffer zone, this protective barrier against potential Western encroachment. Remember, Russia has historically been invaded from the West multiple times. So securing this Western flank is paramount to their security calculation.
So losing Ukraine to the Western sphere of influence would be a major strategic blow to Russia.
It would push their border back hundreds of miles.
Wow.
And it would leave them feeling very vulnerable.
So this is where the heartland theory helps us understand the motivations behind Russia's actions. The annexation of Crimea in 2014, and then the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. These can be seen as attempts to prevent Ukraine from fully aligning with the West to maintain some degree of control.
Some control. Yeah.
Over this crucial buffer zone.
And Athanasiou makes a really interesting point here.
Okay.
He argues that Russia's actions in Ukraine are not just about land or territory. It's about preventing the expansion of NATO, the Western military alliance, closer to Russia's heartland.
So this is where we see that clash of perspectives.
That security dilemma that we talked about earlier. Russia sees NATO expansion as aggressive and threatening, while the West views it as a defensive measure to protect its allies and to deter Russian aggression.
So two very different perspectives.
Very different on the same set of actions.
And this is where understanding the heartland theory can help us navigate
those complexities, to see how geography and history and security calculations all intersect to create these seemingly intractable conflicts.
So we talked about Ukraine being kind of that western edge of the heartland. What about Iran?
Iran's a fascinating case study because it sits at this crossroads of multiple geopolitical zones. We're talking about the heartland, the Middle East, and South Asia.
Okay.
It's a bridge between these regions. It's a hub of trade and energy resources. It's a player on multiple chessboards.
And has a long history.
A very long history of resisting both Western and Russian domination.
Really?
Yeah, charting its own course, seeking to maximize its influence within its own regional sphere.
So Iran itself isn't part of the heartland?
No, but it borders it.
It borders it. And it has the potential.
It has the potential to either facilitate or disrupt the flow of resources, goods, and influence across the Eurasian landmass.
So from a strategic perspective, having a cooperative relationship with Iran would be highly beneficial.
Highly beneficial to any power seeking to dominate the heartland.
And this is why it has become such a focal point of geopolitical competition.
Yes, exactly.
Russia sees Iran as a key partner in its efforts to counter Western influence and to establish a Eurasian economic and security bloc that can challenge American dominance.
And China sees Iran as a crucial node in its Belt and Road Initiative, this massive infrastructure project aimed at connecting Asia to Europe and Africa. Iran's location and its vast energy reserves make it an ideal partner for China in this undertaking.
And on the flip side, the West views Iran with a lot more caution.
Yes, there's a lot of concern about, Iran's growing influence, its nuclear ambitions, its support for groups that are deemed terrorist organizations. All of these things are seen as threats to Western interests.
And we see that play out in the ongoing tensions and sanctions between the West and Iran. It's this strategic rivalry. So Iran sits at this nexus.
At this nexus of competing interests, playing this delicate balancing act, trying to maximize its own leverage and autonomy amidst all of these global power struggles.
But it's a very complex situation.
It is. And again, this is where the heartland theory proves so insightful. It helps us see how Iran's geographic position, its resources, and this complex web of relationships make it a linchpin in the global geopolitical order.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the heartland theory, I think it's clear that even after a century, Mackinder's insights remain remarkably relevant.
Remarkably relevant.
The world has changed dramatically since 1904. But these fundamental principles of geography, resources, and power, they continue to shape global politics.
They do.
Just as he predicted.
And Athanasiou's paper really demonstrates this by applying a modern lens to this theory. It allows us to understand not just the historical events of the 20th century, but also these current events that are unfolding in places like Ukraine and Iran, heartland theory, with this focus on the enduring significance of geography. It offers a really powerful framework for navigating the complexities of the 21st century geopolitical landscape.
I think that's a great place to leave it.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us on this journey.
Yes, thank you.
We hope this deep dive has given you a deeper understanding of the forces that shape our world, and perhaps a renewed appreciation for the enduring power of maps.
Maps.
And the insights they hold.
Absolutely.